So I will start.
Yeah, give your.
Yes.
Ladies and gentlemen, we would like to welcome you to the 2022 NMSA open meeting, annual meeting, public meeting, pick your name. We would like to welcome you to the Stantec Minneapolis office, which is where we are. I'm Randy Nepresh. I work here. I'm also the vice chair of NMSA. And the most important piece of information that I have to convey is the route to the bathrooms is out the door to this main hall right here and just down the hall to your left. Women is the first door on the right, and men is the second door on the right down the hallway. And with that said, I think I will pass it over to Scott Taylor.
Sure. Can you bring up the slides, please?
I desperately hope so. I have to confirm.
All right.
There you go.
Thanks, Randy. You can stay here and run it.
Well, I think I need to do some stuff.
Okay.
Just forward and back.
All right. All right. Well, welcome everybody. My name is Scott Taylor and I'm the chair of NMSA. And with me today, as you heard, is Randy, who's Randy Nepresh, is the vice chair, and also Seth Brown, who is our executive director. Today we've got a full hour and a half for you, so we're going to move fairly briskly through everything. Perfect. Move on to the agenda slide here. We're going to have, for lack of a better term, we called it report out from EPA staff, but I think some good information from them and some time for some limited Q&A there. And then we're going to follow that up with a legislative update from Steve Dye, who is WEF's legislative director. He's going to talk, I think, mostly about the IIJA. And then we'll get into some of the recent things that NMSA has been doing and what we're looking at for the upcoming year, and wrap up and adjourn by 5 p.m. Eastern time. And that is a commitment. I did want to also point out that this is being recorded, and so hopefully everybody's okay with that. Just really quickly, a little note on who's with us today. We have about 140 total registered attendees, 41% of who are MS4 permittee staff, about 34% consultants, and then you can see who the other attendees include. We do have representatives from 34 different states, so a pretty good group here today and pretty diverse group. All right, so that was it. You have anything else to add before we move on, Seth?
No.
Okay, I want to start with our EPA reports then. And first up, we have Michael Dean, and he's going to talk about the, I guess we had it here listed as the bill, but the IIJA, right?
It's Bill when I talk about it.
So I don't think it's any important protocols. So, yeah, I'll turn it over to Mike.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Scott. And thank you to Randy for inviting us here and for hosting us. It's a pleasure to meet you. Come to my hometown. It's always a pleasure to back to Minneapolis. So I'm going to cover the bipartisan infrastructure law, as EPA typically calls the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, IIJA. Try to get through it relatively quickly here so that we can have some time for questions. I understand it sounds like Steve's going to cover some more in his legislative update as well. Maybe perhaps some of the non-ESRA portions. I'm going to be focusing on the ESRA portions as well as our overflow stormwater grants briefly. So Randy's kind enough to provide a few questions that he thought would be good to answer in the form of my presentation. So I'm just going to walk through those and probably given the format, I can probably wait till the end before questions.
Yes, yeah, that was fine.
Okay, so the bill, as we call it, IIJA, was signed on November 15th last year, and EPA has been working with our state partners very diligently to get implementation of the SRF portions as well as other parts of the legislation into action and making progress on the ground. So I imagine many of you are very familiar with it, but I'm going to kind of summarize the total amounts to the SRF. Over the next 5 years, fiscal 22 through 26, with nearly just over $43 billion for the Clean Water State Revolving Fund and the Drinking Water Revolving Fund. I'm, of course, going to focus on the clean water for purposes of today. So there's two pots of money there, what we call the general supplemental appropriations that are for all eligibilities, and then for the first time, a new kind of sub pot of money for emerging contaminants under the Clean Water State Revolving Fund. So for the general supplemental, there's $11.7 billion in total over the next 5 years, starting with 1.9 in the current fiscal year and ramping up to 2.6 billion in the last 2 years of this 5-year period. Very importantly, and a significant change from prior appropriations, 49% of those funds must be provided in the form of in assistance in the form of what we call additional subsidization of grants or principal forgiveness of the loans. So we call it additional subsidization because we always want to remind people that the SRF program, with its low interest rates of typically about 1.2% lately, is subsidized to begin with. So the additional subsidization is either a direct grant or forgiving the principal and interest payments on the loans. So I'll get a little bit more into details of that in a second. Reduce the state match amounts for those of you in state government to 10% from the typical 20% for the first 2 years of that appropriation. And then on the emerging contaminants supplemental appropriation, it's a $1 billion in total over the next 5 years, starting with a relatively small amount of $100 million in this first year, and then ramping up to 230 really million dollars in the next few years. All of that money, all of the $1 billion goes as assistance in the form of additional subsidization, grants, principal forgiveness, and there's no state match requirement for that. Just kind of importantly for the use of the additional subsidization, under the Clean Water General, it's for what we call our statutory eligibilities. And that's for communities that meet the affordability criteria established by the state. There's a mechanism for providing assistance to a non-disadvantaged community when the assistance is directed to households, customers who would face hardship if they paid the full cost of those improvements being funded. And there's also additional eligibilities there for energy, water conservation, and projects to mitigate stormwater. Notwithstanding those kind of additional eligibilities, the agency is really focused on providing assistance to disadvantaged communities, including for those other categories of energy conservation, water conservation, stormwater mitigation. So we're working very, very hard with their states to ensure that additional subsidization addresses communities that historically have perhaps not accessed the program because of lack of affordability, even with the low interest loans. So what's that mean for stormwater? I mean, obviously that amount of money, there's significant opportunities for more projects of all sorts, including stormwater, which has historically not been a big user of the Clean Water State Revolving Fund. And again, this additional funding, it certainly provides a broader range for projects. The bill also amends the underlying authorizations of the Clean Water and Safe Drinking Water Act, particularly in areas of additional subsidization, the amount that goes out in any given year. It also amends the Sewer Overflow and Stormwater Reuse Municipal Grant Program, which we call OSG. So it authorizes, does not appropriate, appropriations of $280 million annually for the next 5 years. It provides an additional eligibility under that program, which is CSO, SSO notification systems. It also establishes essentially a set aside that 25% of the funds are to go to rural and financially distressed communities, as defined by the state on the ladder. Rural meaning 10,000 or less. And of that 25% minimum allocation to those projects, since Congress has passed, at least 60% of that 25% must go to rural communities. So there's some base program changes there. And it also established for all of these programs, both Clean Water SRF as well as the OSG program and all other agency infrastructure programs, a new Build America, Buy America Act to implement. So in rough terms, what needs to happen to make bill provisions real and what is the approximate schedule? On March 8th of this year, EPA released its implementation of the Clean Water and Drinking Water State Revolving Fund provisions of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, laying out all the requirements, the provisions, how states are to apply, how they are to provide assistance, the requirements that apply. And the states are currently now developing intended use plans. For those of you who are familiar with the SRF program, every year for every appropriation, they need to establish an intended use plan of how they intend to use the funds they're applying for. That's happening right now. We expect applications to start coming in about now, late June, early July, and then the application process to proceed with the grants starting to be awarded late summer, early fall. And for the OSG program, we also are updating our implementation documents this summer, incorporating the new bill provisions that I just mentioned, as well as updated data on the allotment formula based on precipitation and the new census data, if it's going to be available in time. So what's in the foci of expanded subsidized CWF funding grants, forgivable loans, and disadvantaged communities mean for local programs? As I noted earlier, many communities have not really benefited from the SRF program over the years, and they now have much more affordable options of essentially either 100% grants, or certainly some states will be looking at these communities providing 100% grant for a portion of it and a low interest loan or zero interest loan for a portion of it as well. But the affordability of the assistance will be much more manageable. And while wastewater utilities have been top of mind for people in the Clean Water SRF for a long time, it's important to remember that all the projects that are eligible for the SRF program are eligible for this additional subsidization, including stormwater and other wet weather projects and non-point source projects as well. We may hear from our colleagues, Rachel and Lisa, a little bit. They said they've been working to help identify some of the projects that could perhaps be funded that are not so much utility-based, but address other community needs as well. And in addition, I think it's important that EPA is investing $100 million over the next 5 years out of its administrative funding for the bill to provide community technical assistance directed specifically at assisting communities prepare for, apply for, receive, and implement SRF funding for the project. So again, we're going to be working very diligently along again with our state partners and lots of outside technical assistance providers to identify communities that can benefit from this assistance and to especially some of the communities, maybe stormwater projects that have not historically used the SRF system, to get them to understand it and apply for it and be able to benefit from it. Then finally, does the EPA have plans and ideas to expand CWS funding for stormwater projects and other programs? So EPA is constantly encouraging states to utilize the full broad eligibilities of the SRF program, including for stormwater management. We encourage communities to bring their innovative projects to their states. Again, this is very much a federalized program where the states structure their program to address their priorities and their objectives, and they put together their list. So it's very important that projects of all types work with their state programs, making sure that the kind of benefits their projects deliver are recognized and incorporated into the project priority system, the project priority list, and ultimately intended use plan. In a few minutes, you're going to hear from my colleague Elizabeth about the Clean Watersheds Needs Survey. We're making an extensive effort to ensure that we get much better handle on the stormwater needs of this country in this iteration of the needs survey. So it's really important that you work to get those numbers on there as well. That elevates the importance and the impact, potential impact of projects, not only at the EPA level, but the states that make decisions of who and what projects receive funding. For the OSG program, the president's budget request that went forward earlier this year was for the full $280 million that was authorized under the bill, and the House Appropriations bill that was released about 2 weeks ago now also had the $280 million in there too. So we'll see how the legislative process works out. But again, this program is just starting to get up and running. It's intended to grow, and we're anticipating that it will. And look forward to working with want to implement that as well. So with that, I think we'll pass for now and back to you, Scott.
Okay, well, we're open now for Q&A, and just wanted to clarify for everybody too, Michael didn't have any slides. Elizabeth is gonna have some slides. So if you don't see slides advancing, it's not your internet that's broken, it's that we're not advancing any slides. So are there any questions in the room and or the chat? Hopefully Randy or Seth can get us ones from the chat, right?
I'm working on the chat.
Okay. Any from the room? We have for Michael. Yeah, Steve, always good for a question.
I'll get you
I'm
back.
gonna give you a softball.
Okay.
Can you, please, educate the group about the BABA waiver that EPA is proposing? Buy America, Build America.
Oh, so we're gonna take the rest of the afternoon?
Well, I think you could, be quick and.
Yeah, so again, those of you familiar with the SRF program know that we've had an American iron and steel requirements for quite a few years now. And Bill essentially extended that to all projects, construction materials. So it's construction materials, manufactured goods, lumber, drywall, as our team says, everything but sand and stones and that type of thing. So we are working diligently to stand that up. It's a little bit easier for us compared to some programs in the office of water because we have an existing experience with American iron and steel, which will be kind of rolled into the iron and steel portion of BABA. But that came into effect on May 14th of this year. And clearly projects, the big problem we face is many projects, all projects essentially have construction and engineering and planning going on for a long period of time, initial procurement. Then all of a sudden, if the requirements come into play, they have not spent the last 2 years or whatever the time period is to prepare for domestic reference purchasing. So we have a proposed waiver and for I think 2 more days, I believe it is out for public comment, which would basically incorporate projects that have plans and specifications in place by the time of the implementation would not have to comply with the BABA requirements. So that's a very, very simple way, something that's really, really complex. We're still getting a lot of questions. We'll have a substantial Q&A and guidance document coming out that builds on the government-wide OMB guidance document that came out earlier this year and focusing on our projects. So it is kind of important for people to understand that, particularly against some like maybe non-point source and whether this applies to everything now, and the 319 programs and everything, things that you would not necessarily consider infrastructure in the past. Is going to be affected by this. So we're working on a separate waiver for what we call other OW programs, other than the Clean Water SRF, Drinking Water SRF, and WIPIA that have already had American iron and steel in place, to have a different waiver period to give all these types of projects that have never had to deal with this before an adaptation period to start getting their projects in line for preference. So hope that was. It's really hard to not simple about it. And there's still a lot of questions. There's still a lot of questions we don't know the answer to yet. So
The point is, you're offering a waiver now, and there's avenues for getting waivers for individual projects.
Yeah, just as American Iron and Steel is always going to be, individual project waivers and could consider to be product waivers we've seen in the past when things just fundamentally not available. But the Office of Management and Budget, the way this sort of clear, this is all about building domestic industrial capacity. So everything we do is in that context of, so you're going to see always time period waivers. It's like, okay, we understand it's not going to happen now, but the whole objective of this is to start industry creating capacity here over this year, next year, the years to come. So everything, all the waivers will be done in that context of, it's not an absolute, it's not forever, it's until the domestic industry is established.
All right, why don't we go out to the interweb, get a few questions?
Well, we have a question from the chat. It's from Pat Sauer of Iowa, which is, how does all of this translate to what a state may get and when they may get it.
Okay, so
Another softball question.
yeah, no, so SRFs are, the funds are allotted on the statutory basis for the Clean Water Act. On the State Clean Water Act, a little bit different because they have, it adjusts every 4 years based on their needs survey, but for us, it's essentially a formula that was established in 1972 for the construction grants program and tweaked very little, not for a long time. So that alone, as you can imagine, creates lots of discussion amongst members of Congress, where those states have grown considerably since 1972, and their numbers are not big. So again, the allotment formula is the allotment formula for both programs, the emerging contaminants in general. The money is available now. As I said, we've seen, I think we might have seen a couple applications come in. And this is on top of, but I didn't mention, this is on top of the general underlying SRF program. So we also got our fiscal year 22 appropriation in March. So they're applying for the baseline program, the emerging contaminants, and the bill supplemental program, or one of those pots. For example, we've heard quite a few states are going to hold off on emerging contaminants until next year. You have 2 years to take the money, so a lot of states are waiting until next year to establish emerging contaminant, perhaps. But you can apply now, and once the applications we're getting in late June, early July, we should see several months later the capitalization grants awarded.
So one more question from the chat, which is related to EPA's efforts to provide technical assistance, which is, what is EPA doing to assure that technical assistance providers really understand stormwater needs and opportunities and the full range of funding opportunities beyond the SRF program that can fund stormwater work?
Okay, I'll take the latter part first. Is that under the statute, you have to be a little bit careful, because under the bill, this technical assistance funding has to be used with the explicit purpose of administering the SRF program. So we're taking that to drive people to the SRF program, understanding that technical assistance is not exclusive to that. So as you help them prepare a capital plan, look at the financing options, clearly SRF and other as well. So depending on the community and depending on the technical assistance providers, we, better or worse, kind of focus on some of those other types of programs. As far as, it's an interesting question on knowing the full range. One of the things we've talked about, I think, is once this, again, it closes this week, the request for application for the $100 million over the next 5 years going out is attracting a lot of interest from technical assistance providers that are not historic technical assistance providers, perhaps. And so we have been talking about how we make sure they understand the SRF program, both clean water and drinking water. So when they're providing technical assistance, they really make sure they know what they're, talking about. Because I think we're seeing a lot of consortia, for example, maybe similar ones with academics, environmental groups, social justice groups, and others, maybe part of consortia and whatnot. So, we've been talking about maybe having some kind of training to make sure that they really understand their abilities. But thank you for the question, because it helps. We've had the discussion on innovative technology as well. How to make sure that these technical assistance providers are looking, whether it be lower technology or maybe higher technology, maybe costs a little bit more, but it's going to lower energy labor costs over time. So we have a lot of work to do on that as well.
Maybe one more. Ed, did you have a question?
Yeah, just a simple one. I think it was going back to the Buy America Now clause, and that excludes professional services, right?
Yeah, as far as buying American.
Yeah, but A&E firms that are international.
Yeah, no, it's for construction materials, manufactured goods. But no, they did not reach that the international firm or even a foreign firm.
Okay.
All right, thank you, Michael. We're going to move on now, and we're going to talk about the Clean Watershed Needs Survey, which hasn't been done since, I think, 2012, and we have Elizabeth Schlout. Hopefully I got your last name.
Yeah, that was a good
Very
one.
well.
Just drop half the letters, right?
Nice. I'm just gonna chalk it out to luck. But
Yeah.
anyway, we have Elizabeth to lead us through that. So I don't know who advances the slides. Is it me, Randy?
That's me. I have the.
Oh, you do.
magic
Oh,
marker.
yeah, control.
I do have control.
You took control.
Then you're completely in control, Elizabeth.
Great,
Take it
thank
away.
you. Thank you, everyone. So thank you for the introduction. I'm Elizabeth Schlout. here with Michael Dean from the State Revolving Fund. So I'm sure many of the folks here in this room and also attending virtually are familiar with the survey. So what I'm going to do is just give a very brief overview of it and then talk about some of the key dates and some of the high-level points about how the survey functions and what municipalities and stormwater professionals can do to get involved to make sure that stormwater needs are accounted for in this iteration of the survey. So to start off, this is the slide I show everyone. It's this quick explanation of the survey. Essentially, the Clean Watersheds Needs Survey, it's been going on since the early 80s. It's supposed to occur every 4 years, so it's alternating with the Drinking Water Needs Survey, but it is very different from the Drinking Water Needs Survey. So this is a common misconception for folks. The Drinking Water Needs Survey is more of a statistical extrapolation. They have a really good understanding of the number of facilities, the types of facilities for all the 50 states and territories. So theirs functions in a lot more, I guess you could say, streamlined fashion. And we're aspiring to that, but we're still at the level where we do a census style survey. So that's probably the biggest difference between us and the Drinking Water Needs Survey. But the Clean Watersheds Needs Survey, it is a comprehensive assessment of the capital costs, meaning we do not include O&M, to meet the water quality goals of the Clean Water Act and address water quality and water quality related public health concerns. What this means in practical terms is that any project that is captured by the survey needs to address a human health or water quality issue, and it can only include capital costs. So you can't include payroll, you can't include operations and maintenance. So it's just looking at essentially the startup initial cost to implement a project. And then how are these results presented? We compiled them all to a report to Congress. This is very important because it is considered the official word on EPA's assessment of the capital infrastructure needs for the U.S. 50 states and territories. And we do publish the data to make them publicly available on EPA's data dashboard. The 2012 results are still up, and hopefully soon they will be replaced by the 2022. And I will get into what soon means towards the end of the presentation. Why the survey matters. Obviously, folks in the room here are very interested, know that this survey is really important, but digging a little bit deeper in that, the importance of the survey is, number one, that the survey is used by Congress and state legislatures in their grant and loan planning. However, as Michael referred to earlier, the Clean Water SRF program, it has a set formula. The allocation is based off of, as you said, the 1972-ish allocation formula. So the results of the survey currently do not inform the allocation of clean water SRF funds. That is something only Congress has the power to change. However, we did have a recent change where the allocation formula for the sewer overflow and stormwater reuse municipal grants program, where this survey does play a very key part in that. It is one of the central parts of that allocation formula. This program, also known as the OSG program, is fairly new, just a couple of years old, and it is continuing to grow in size. And we do expect the results of this survey will be used to inform how funds for this program are allocated to the states. So that makes entering or getting a correct assessment, or as close as possible, of states' stormwater needs will have a direct impact on the funds they will get from this program. And then finally, of course, there's no other data source like this. And so the data are used by industry and academic researchers. The American Society of Engineers, the report card they put out, they use our data to help create a score. So it's a very important survey. As I mentioned previously, we are very much a census style survey, so we rely a lot on documentation, which makes this a very in-depth, very time-consuming data collection process. Every need, and by need I mean those capital costs usually directly related to a facility, such as a wastewater treatment facility or an MS4, requires a document. So this document can be in the shape of a CIP, an IUP, intended use plan, engineer's plan, a municipal stormwater management plan, MS4 planning documents, comes in very varied shapes and sizes, but documents are usually the basis of the costs that are entered into the survey. There are exceptions though, because we know, especially for stormwater, documentation can be difficult to come by to detail those needs that we know that are out there. So for small communities that have populations of 10,000 or fewer people, we do provide the small community form, which is a slimmed down digital version of the survey that can be emailed directly to a small community contact. And then if no documentation exists and it happens to be a community that is falls outside of that small threshold, we do have two other options, which include developing what we call a state-specific approach. And so this is an alternative to providing documentation where a state uses, or municipality, uses local data, whether it's from a state agency, university study, information that municipality has on hand, to bridge the gap in that documentation, to be able to say, we know the data, here are the costs, and this is how we were able to establish the need. And then finally, there is the option to use what we call the cost estimation tool. So it's an EPA created tool, essentially a cost curve, where the community provides the inputs. So say they have the documentation that says, we know how big we're going to make this, we know how many we're going to make. We just don't have a hard estimate. We do offer some cost estimation tools to get those estimates. Digging a little bit deeper into state-specific approaches. When I talk about state-specific approaches, we have a whole template for state coordinators to fill out. And so the approach is to either estimate both the projects and the costs, or one or the other. And the important thing here is that the estimates need to be for current needs or needs within the next 20 years. And that is the scope of the survey. This is a bit of a challenge because we know most planning documents operate on a 5-year planning cycle. And so it's a reality that we acknowledge that most of the estimates are not going to be truly for 20 years. And so it's been something we've been working with states on how do you project accurate current needs while kind of staying within the scope of the survey. The best kinds of state-specific approaches are ones that have been used outside of the Clean Watersheds Needs Survey. A very common example is economic impact studies, where a state has passed maybe a new nutrient limit, a new TMDL, and a state agency looks at the impact on the affected facilities of the new legislation or the new regulation. And so they have an idea of how much it will cost to update facilities to comply. And that's perfect data where maybe it's not a standard form of documentation, but you're able to take the data, take the costs that have been recognized through the state study, and use that to say, this is our estimated future needs. So I don't want to give away presentations if folks are going to be at the conference tomorrow. I do want to give a quick plug where Zach and I will both be presenting in separate sessions. Where I will be able to give specific examples on state-specific approaches. We have a session at 10:45 a.m. and another one at 3:45. But just as a quick overview, a lot of the states that we've heard from, we have quite a few states in the Northeast that have come up with stormwater state-specific approaches. And a lot of it relies on taking known costs, and maybe they have a couple counties or MS4s that have done a really good job with planning for their green infrastructure needs. And they're able to say, well, based off of these, in other words, case studies, we can say this is the average dollar per acre cost to implement, the needed green infrastructure projects. So therefore, it's going to cost this much for these other counties that have to comply with the same regulations, but haven't had a study conducted. So that's to give folks a rough idea. Some of the stuff we've been seeing. So for the Clean Watersheds Needs Timeline,
Already here.
we're navigating now through space and time.
Yes.
For the Clean Watersheds Needs Survey, the timeline, just to give folks a sense of where we're at in the data collection process. So something I probably should have mentioned at the top is that data collection, while it is a statewide effort, the physical data entry is done by state coordinators. These state coordinators are appointed at either the SRF office or by the state. And they're the ones that are doing the physical number entering into what we call the data entry portal, which is an online portal developed by EPA to do the data collection. However, the state coordinators rely heavily on other state agencies, their state contacts and community contacts to be aware of the projects. And so without that proper outreach, the state coordinator may never know of some of the projects. And I will, at the end of the presentation, provide information on how to get in touch with your state coordinator. But before we move forward, data collection started on March 1st, 2022, so just a couple months ago, and it's open for a whole year. And we do this because we recognize that a lot of state coordinators that are responsible for the data entry also have other day jobs, right? This is not their full-time job, especially since the last survey didn't happen since 2012. The staff that probably were the ones working on this no longer even work at their agency, and then also the data collection is very detailed. So there's an entire year to do data collection. May 31st was our first data deadline, which was for proposals for new state-specific approaches. However, not to worry, folks. If you have an idea or you have data that you want to develop into a state-specific approach, or maybe questions about what even is a state-specific approach, since this is a kind of a high-level presentation, you can still reach out to your state coordinator. So we have a second deadline for September 1st, where states wanting to adapt another state's proposal have until then to request and say how they plan on implementing it themselves. And we've gotten quite a few in, so there's pretty high chances that whatever idea you have would be similar enough to another state's that you'd likely be able to submit it. But the biggest date, most important date, is February 28th, 2023. This is when data collection ends. The portal shuts. There's no more data gets in. That is when we end it and begin the QA/QC. So the whole summer there afterwards, we'll be doing data analysis and quality checks, and then sometime thereafter, we expect to do the report to Congress. So how do you get in touch with your state coordinator? How do you get more information? I know this was a lot rapid fire, so this is the website to go to if you want to have more information on the survey and ingest the information I just threw at you in a more calmer pace. We have an entire page on what is the Clean Watersheds Needs Survey. Can be found here at the bottom. Let's see here, if I can get my little laser pointer. EPA.gov/CWNS. We have what is the Clean Watersheds Needs Survey. You can look at what your state entered in 2012 to get a sense of what your starting base is. And then also we do have the page available in Spanish and access to a webinar that Josh Klein, who is my colleague here, also working on the survey, he and I worked with NMSA to present on stormwater, green infrastructure, and the Clean Watersheds Needs Survey. So a link to that is on our webpage as well. And that is a very comprehensive presentation on the survey. So if you're interested in learning more, highly encourage you to check that presentation out. And I do believe NMSA also has links to it on their site as well for members who want to check that out.
Easy to find.
Excellent. Good to hear. We always like that. All right. So questions?
Awesome. Thank you, Elizabeth. That was an excellent presentation. Can we go to the internet for the first question, just so they don't feel left behind?
Sure.
Randy or?
Certainly. So, first of all, I have a comment to make, which is EPA's commitment to getting better stormwater data in the Clean Watersheds Needs Survey this time around has been sincere and very impressive. NMSA's been working on this for a while, and Josh and Elizabeth have just been hugely helpful. And we're making a point of saying this because Michael's in the room and he's one of Elizabeth's and Josh's boss. So we want to be sure.
I know they are.
Yeah.
The review is due next week.
We can't tell you how much we appreciate it. A question that came in though, that's kind of related, which is in light of the past history and the poor stormwater data, what is EPA doing to provide incentives and support for better data submittals by local program managers? And how are you helping
state coordinators that in many cases know wastewater really well, but don't know stormwater nearly as well.
Yeah, no, great questions, Randy. So I think first off, the challenge is that EPA's hands are kind of tied in terms of what we can do we can't do data entry for the states. However, one thing that we've been really focusing on this round of the survey is just getting the word out there, doing webinars, doing trainings. Josh and I hold office hours for the state coordinators bi-weekly. We've been doing that now since the start of the survey. So that's kind of the basics. It's holding office hours doesn't seem like much, but it's our way of recognizing that the state's attentions are split about 3 million different ways right now, especially with bill implementation, ARPA, and all these other pressures. So in the simplest terms, what we're trying to do is making ourselves available as much as possible. But for the states and trying to make sure that stormwater is captured, we've really been dedicating a lot of money towards, a lot of contract money towards helping states work with their state, helping states work with us to develop these state-specific approaches. Because we really think that's going to be the main way for states to get their needs into the Clean Watersheds Needs Survey. Kind of the overlying pressure on all of this is that in order for the report to Congress to be published, it first must be approved by OMB, which is the Office of Management and Budget. So any formal report by a federal agency that has numbers that says that this is what it's going to cost has to be approved by OMB. And so we're going to really have to see, once we get these numbers in, we've been told, especially with the new legislation change, that all needs will be collected by the survey, that stormwater is going to be collected, non-point source is going to be collected. But at the end of the day, in terms of how the report comes out, that's something we don't have control over. But what we do have control over is publishing the data to the public on our data dashboard. So that a lot of that is not to raise worry, but for folks that are very familiar with the survey and know what happened in the past, that's the reason I say those things. That's the comments maybe more for folks that know how 2012 went, when stormwater needs were not captured to the fullest extent. The biggest difference here that we're working with is that it's now legislated that stormwater needs must be collected, which is a huge difference. And then I add that little asterisk that I just said there, which is, well, the report to Congress, how that looks at the very end, it has to get OMB stamp of approval. We don't see why there would be a problem, but as anything, that's the famous last words, right? Yeah, I knew, right? Naive, hopeful, right? But even with that, though, even if there were something, which I really don't foresee there being, the data itself, though, is still published on EPA's website and is still available for states to look at.
Before approval from OMB.
Correct. That is independent of OMB, the data dashboard.
Rob, did you have a question?
Yeah, there's always been a challenge sometimes with the Clean Water Act and quality versus quantity and geomorphology. Is things like stream restoration or considered infrastructure?
100%, yes.
Good. Thank you.
Yes, of course. The only thing I have with that with non-point source is I have a little bit of background in non-point source, and I know that most of the costs usually come from maintenance, that upkeep.
Yeah.
Once you do that initial stream bank restoration or removing, like armoring, that's where most of the costs are. And unfortunately, that's not captured by the survey.
Yeah.
But we actually have quite a few non-point source state-specific approaches that we've approved. Several by Maine, looking at the cost of maintaining lake health. So hydro modification, all those kinds of non-point source needs are captured by the survey.
Thank you.
Let's do one more. Seth, could you read the last internet question?
Yeah, it said, it seems like there's some confusion on how this all works. So I just want to put that out there. So the question is, who has or will have a template for the survey and when? Is that EPA? Is it the state coordinator? Is there a way to make this available so the locals can prepare?
Yeah, no, that is a good question. I know if you're not familiar with the survey, it is a little confusing. So the survey isn't really it's not a template or a form that you can print out. It is on this data entry portal, and it's a series of questions that the state coordinator has to fill out. So to answer Jim's question, the state coordinator has access to the data entry portal. They also have copies of the small community form. So since that is kind of a pared down version of the survey, if you reached out to your state coordinator, they would more than likely be able to provide you with a copy of that small community form, so you would know what kind of data to look for. I'm also happy if Jim wants to email me. I have the email address here. Josh and I are also happy to talk about what kind of technical data we're looking for. So local court or local contacts can prepare.
Okay,
Great.
sounds great.
Yeah, one last, no, we gotta find.
Can I just make a?
Yeah, this-
because this is important for us.
Yeah.
Okay.
NMSA,
Yeah.
The state coordinators, from my experience in New England, working with them in a number of states, they're overwhelmed.
Yeah.
Because of ARPA, because of Bill, and then also the NEA survey. It's really incumbent upon our community, the practitioners at the state level, to help support the coordinators right now. And the state supported approaches that we're gonna talk about tomorrow, and that also are gonna continue to come in, could provide a pretty efficient means to get at some pretty significant needs. And it's really incumbent upon the state associations and or the sub-associations to help here, because coordinators just really are doing anything they can right now. It's important for our group.
You wanna, you have anything else to add?
Yeah, Elizabeth, one quick question or clarification. Looks like you're typing something
No,
up,
we're
so
all set.
was that okay? What about flood control projects? I know that, that there was a question about stream restoration from Rob over here. Are there aspects of flood control projects that can be considered potentially applicable in this context?
Yeah, so let me just wanted to make sure, see if I can end sharing. So for flood control, if it is flood control that has water quality benefits, so you're not just shunting dirty water from one location to another and kind of just pushing the problem down the line, then it is eligible. So we've talked with a lot of states with that point of clarification. It is very fuzzy. It is very difficult to draw that line.
That's why I want to bring this up, because I know it's a point.
Yeah. But things like dams or levees are generally not eligible, with the sole exception if the dam is there to protect a POTW.
Mhm.
If the purpose of the dam is to protect critical publicly owned wastewater treatment plants, then that's eligible. Outside of that, those kinds of hard infrastructure are usually not. Again, though, it comes down to, is there a stated water quality
Yeah,
benefit?
we face this a lot just on SRF projects. We've faced a lot with current earmark projects. There's eligible with ARPA because Treasury one eligible. And we have to make a lot of calls on what's the water quality benefit of it, because there's a lot of flood control projects that, I mean,
There's a next,
there's always some, there's not always, it can be worse than you said. If you're taking a bunch of impervious surface.
Right.
Running it off into a small stream, it's gonna have a detrimental effect typically.
Right.
If you treat it lightly. But, a lot of flood controllers say, well, of course, this is helping, but it's not the purpose of it. So you wanna have some kind of pretty specific water quality benefit. For
but
all.
there's a recognition that there is a potential for a nexus between water quantity and quality
Which is
with some projects.
Yeah, correct. And when you're dealing with wet weather flows like that, the quantity is what's causing the flush or whatever else, obviously, right? So, yeah.
All right, thanks, Michael and Elizabeth, those excellent presentations. We're gonna move along now. And I think next up is Elizabeth Biddle. Am I right? I guess, and she's co-presenting with Rachel. So, Lisa and Rachel, the floor is yours. Take it away.
Thank you, Lisa Biddle, and I'm joined here by Rachel Urban. We're both in the sister division to Michael and Elizabeth in the Office of Wastewater Management. And are you seeing my screen okay?
Yep.
Okay, great. So I was gonna start out and just provide a couple updates on some of the permitting things we've been working on lately. And I'm sure that you're aware in March, the Census Bureau eliminated the definition of urbanized area, which the Phase 2 Small MS4 program relies upon. So we've not had maps developed based on the 2020 census. And these are typically the maps that EPA and states use in order to inform the MS4 program. And we know that this obviously creates a lot of questions, and we don't have all of the answers yet, but we want to assure you that we are working to address this, and the upcoming months. So I would just urge you to stay tuned. And I wanted to share a couple other newly posted resources on our webpage. I think most people would be familiar with the menu of BMP's pages, which is a collection of over 100 fact sheets on different stormwater practices that include things like applicability, implementation, and effectiveness information. And we have been updating these fact sheets and posting them online. Right now we have fact sheets posted under the illicit discharge detection and elimination section, post-construction, construction, pollution prevention, and good housekeeping. And we're continuing to work on other ones that will be posted as soon as we can. One thing hot off the presses of just this morning is that we just posted a new compendium to our series of permitting examples that highlights how green infrastructure has been incorporated into permits. So that's online and available for you to look at now. I forgot to note that anything in this presentation that has an underlining is actually a link, so you can click and get more information later. We were also asked to give an update on the water reuse action plan and progress being made there. And I will say there has been progress made on actions that are specifically related to stormwater, including an expert convening and a report on stormwater capture and use that looks into opportunities, challenges, and next steps to expand implementation of stormwater harvesting. And the team's also been posting information related to stormwater capture and use and holding webinar series on the benefits, drivers, and treatment standards related to capturing urban stormwater. And there's also a training webinar related to how permitting can support new technologies and strategies related to water. Another couple things that are coming soon. We've been talking a lot about offsite stormwater management lately, and this really provides a way to manage post-construction stormwater at a location other than the new or redevelopment site under different circumstances. And we're interested in and have been looking into developing a web page with some information and links to existing resources on this topic, as well as pulling together some case studies showcasing successful examples across the country. And eventually we want to add to our sort of compendium series with some example permit conditions that are related to offsite stormwater management. Another thing happening is the recently transmitted report to Congress on stormwater infrastructure funding and financing. And the report includes task force recommendations developed by the Environmental Financial Advisory Board, or EFAB, which is an existing federal advisory committee. And it also includes the entire report that the EFAB task force developed. And it does include challenges and needs that came from stakeholder sessions that EPA held around the country, and also EPA actions that are currently being worked on that may be responsive to some of the recommendations. So that hyperlink on the slide gets you to the EPA's Water Finance Center, and that will include the EFAB report that I mentioned, and it will contain information on the report to Congress once that's posted. So we're also working on a set of communication tools related to stormwater outreach called Stormwater Smart. So I'm going to turn it over to Lisa to share some more details on that.
Thanks. So we are in the final stages of producing a new suite of communication tools for MS4 permittees that we're calling Stormwater Smart. It was actually inspired by conversations we had with NMSA, so we're really excited to be talking to you about this. A few years ago, we had those initial conversations, and the intention is to help MS4s with their public education and outreach programs. The three goals provided a framework for developing products that cover a wide range of topics, all designed to be used for social media, web pages, and or as hard copy handouts and posters. The messaging in all the materials have been refined and vetted with a team of communications and technical folks at EPA and in our contracting world, and designed for local authorities and to be able to add their contact information and personalize it to their community. We hope the materials are going to help the MS4s empower residents and business owners in their communities with information that encourages them to become stormwater management advocates. So the materials are going through the final internal EPA review, and in parallel with that, we're developing a rollout plan to get these materials out to communities. And so we would really welcome NMSA's input on how we should advertise and distribute the materials and get feedback from MS4s as they hopefully test them out in their programs. So we'll have our contact information at the end here, and we hope that you'll email us your ideas.
So I want to give you a quick update on the NPDES electronic reporting rule. And EPA has been working closely with states to make general permits and program reports electronic. So each state seems to be at a different point in terms of progress and prioritization of information when I checked into it recently. So I wanted to share that there is a dashboard, and the link is on the bottom of the slide, that includes progress made as well as information on EPA's coordination with the states. So you may want to check that link out if you're interested. And if you if you have more detailed questions about this, I can certainly put you in contact with the right people to help answer those questions if it's a state-specific sort of thing. Moving on to the next slide, one area that we've been focused on is emerging contaminants, many of which have a nexus to stormwater permitting and related programs. And in the stormwater program, we're particularly interested in finding solutions that save money and prevent pollutants from coming into contact with stormwater. And going beyond that, really to reduce or prevent the generation of those pollutants in the first place. So we want to share a few links with you with a few resources that may be of interest in relating to address these different types of emerging contaminants. And the first one is related to addressing PFAS and expectations for where EPA is the permitting authority. So there's a link there to a memo that explains sort of what EPA's approach will be as permits are issued. And it also includes a link to a compendium on trash-related stormwater permitting conditions. So if you haven't checked that out, I know that came out last year, but you might want to look there too. And then I just shared a general link to a page by our sister office on microplastics, because we're hearing more and more about microplastics recently, and I thought that that might be of interest for folks if they need to learn more or look for different resources that could help on that. And we're also excited that we've recently been engaging more on source control and true source control. And I just wanted to thank everyone for having us participate on recent webinars that NMSA has been doing related to really tackling and looking at source control. And we're looking forward to continuing that dialogue.
Okay. And I know we need to make up some time, so we'll try, and I'll try to be pretty quick. We just have 2 more slides to share, and again, it's a lot of live links that I think Randy will share our PDF afterwards, and folks can kind of explore some of the resources we're highlighting here. This slide I'm presenting on behalf of Robin DeYoung, who's our Green Infrastructure and Integrated Planning Coordinator in the branch, I know that she's been in touch with NMSA on several things recently. So on our website, we house a lot of resources on green infrastructure, including past technical assistance reports, case studies, resources on funding, and recorded webcasts that have been held quarterly since 2014. And I've included the topics here from the webcast series from this year, where we're focusing in on operations and maintenance and asset management. And we've also just last year relaunched the Green Infrastructure Federal Collaborative. That's a cooperative effort among federal agencies to foster engagement and cooperation and actively work to promote implementation of green infrastructure. There's a lot of coordination and trying to align resources and our energy and efforts on that to really highlight some of the benefits of green infrastructure. One of the outputs I've linked to here from one of the webcasts that the Green Infrastructure Collaborative did recently is a master summary of, they've compiled all the federal funding and technical assistance opportunities that can be used to help advance the implementation of green infrastructure. So I know there was a question earlier about, kind of collecting all the different funding opportunities that are out there. So I hope that'll be a useful source to reference for at least federal funding sources. And then ongoing right now, we are continuing to do webcasts as part of the collaborative effort in partnership with the American Association for the Advancement of Science. We've done some virtual convenings with a national theme about understanding key challenges and opportunities for green infrastructure implementation. And we've also now launched into a series of regionally focused conversations. And so there's information about those on our website as well. And last but not least, integrated planning. I think we've talked to NMSA, and probably a lot of you have heard EPA talk about this topic. Integrated planning is about encouraging municipalities to think holistically and more long-term about their Clean Water Act requirements and goals to get water quality improvements faster. Of note, the SRF funding and all of the new bill money can be used, can be pursued for integrated planning and long-term planning for stormwater. We have a lot of ongoing activities and resources on our webpage. I've tried to link and list out several of those for you here, including some free technical assistance that we're offering right now through the Environmental Finance Centers of University of Maryland and UNC. And that people can use that as a resource to help with integrated planning, developing integrated plans, or doing some of the more technical components that I know stormwater utilities don't often have an economist on staff, and these people have expertise in some of the economic analyses that go into long-term planning. So you can call them up and consult with them. And we are also developing some resources for states to help make the connection between the state permitting authority and the permittees on integrated planning, and those will be rolling out this summer. And there's also a series of fact sheets for sort of, depending where you're at in the process, the basics and how to get started with integrated planning, how to fund the development of a plan, etc. And at the bottom here, I'm highlighting long-term stormwater planning. Since we saw communities were struggling to finance and prioritize and plan for stormwater management solutions and more of a long-term horizon, we created a set of resources that were aimed specifically at supporting those efforts. So fueled by piloting the process in communities over the past several years, we developed resources focused on 4 main topics: asset management, financing and funding, sustainability of sites for improved stormwater management, and incorporation of green infrastructure into roadway projects. And from this effort, we will be sharing worksheets, resources, and a revised guide to long-term stormwater planning, as well as example materials from communities that we worked with. And that will hopefully roll out later this year. And with that, Rachel and I are happy to take any questions.
All right, thanks, Lisa and Rachel. That was really great. We appreciate it. Let's go to the chat for our first question. Seth is going to cue it up.
Yeah, so I think there's some questions related to the urban area and census, and I'm wondering if there's some background information, like why is it that they've eliminated the urban area definition, and what will be used for urban area maps or MS4s if the definition of urban area has been eliminated. So what's the background and what's the plan moving forward? Do you guys have any thoughts on that or anything that you can share?
Do you want me to start with the background, then I'll pivot over to you?
Sounds good.
Okay. So I think that census moved in this direction because they weren't seeing a need to distinguish between urbanized areas and urban clusters, which are the 2 subcomponents that make up an urban area. All of those sound very similar to me and I'm sure to lots of people out there. And so they were trying to come up with a way to make it keep up with the growth and to capture the growth that would be attributed in more of an urbanized way. And they decided that they were just going to get rid of those 2 sub classifications and just have urban that would be commensurate with like rural. And so that was why they moved in that direction, I think, ultimately. And then I'll turn it over to Lisa about the status.
Yeah, so we have been tracking what the census was working on since they proposed this change in definition, and it relatively recently finally got finalized. And so we've been kind of talking with them, trying to figure out when they're going to publish their maps, which is really what's needed for us to make an assessment on how to kind of grow the MS4 program moving forward, since as Rachel said, the urbanized area itself won't be delineated. It does seem like they're likely to retain some of the same data that was the basis for urbanized area in what they come out with. So we're waiting to see those maps and tables that will get released as part of that. And in the meantime, we are, briefing our management, making sure everybody is prepared with the potential, developments from the census, and sort of waiting for that data so we can lay it out for them. But our expectation is that MS4s that are currently permitted, that they will continue to be permitted. And there's language in the phase 2 regulations when they were first written that kind of explains that that's the intention of the program. And then it's just a matter of how do we provide more clarification about moving forward, how permitting authorities are going to use what the census does provide or use other data to figure out how to keep the program moving forward and making sure we're managing an urban stormwater appropriately.
So it sounds like there's not going to be a major shift because of this, Lisa?
That's not our expectation. Again, we're still kind of briefing our leadership on it, but my expectation is that permittees that currently have a stormwater permit, that they will continue to be permitted, and whether like the sort of jurisdiction with which, because some MS4s grow, my understanding is when the decennial census comes out in the past. So it's just a matter of how we're going to explain how that will work.
We're gonna do one more.
Yeah, there's one other quick question is, are there any plans that EPA has on kind of implementing, and this might be for you, Michael, as well, on, because there was some recommendations that came out of the EFAB stormwater report. I was wondering if there's any information about or a plan to move forward on trying to implement, because I know that you guys had responses to those recommendations, right? Just wondering if there's a plan moving forward on
To implement.
yes, and based upon those recommendations.
I don't know. I know, Lisa, I think that you've been talking to Warwick as well. I reached out from the weekend because I wasn't even sure where it was, because it had been released in May, so I haven't paid much attention to it recently, to be honest with you. But things like this, a new separate program, we think like the OSG program is
Kind of
like that, and we're really working, and we'll get some more information coming out how to not integrate, but how to co-fund, SRF and whatnot, or other kind of a separate stormwater SRF. If we see the kind of,
Which is one of the recommendations.
yeah, obviously we want to highlight the ability to use and to encourage the greater use of the current clean water SRF for stormwater needs. It really address water quality impacts, where you can make a difference, and how to leverage the two programs together, particularly if you see the kind of appropriations at OSG. I mean, the 280 is not, it's not huge in SRF terms, but if you go back to
It's a lot more than it is
and
today.
if you go back to the proposals under, Build Back Better, it was a lot more money on that kind of thing. So I think we're taking that as
Starting point.
the starting point, yeah,
Go
for
from
that
there.
particular one.
Anything you want to add, Lisa?
Rachel, did you want to add anything from what Ellen provided? Trying to catch up on my.
I don't know that there's a whole lot to add besides they're moving forward, it seems like, on things that they're able to tackle. And that's outlined in the report. And I think that they're trying to assess other things and what can be done currently. And then there are some things that would take, it seemed like, congressional changes. So those are a bit out of our control.
One question from the room, if there is any.
Yeah, one more online.
Okay, let's do it then, quick.
EPA partners to support green infrastructure. Some states are having to battle developers associations such as the Home Builders Association. And the questioner is wondering, how has EPA worked to partner with the states to help resolve and address these conflicts? Another softball question.
Enforce requirements.
Yeah, I think, one of the areas that we definitely emphasize is education and outreach and coordination. We try to be plugged in and supportive of workforce efforts that involve training more people and making them more aware of how to build and operate green infrastructure, and then getting information out about the benefits and the cost effectiveness of a lot of these solutions. And I think analyses like those can go a ways with organizations like the home builders. They're also a stakeholder on some of our other work within the branch, and we write a construction general permit, and we engage with them pretty heavily on that effort. So maybe there's an opportunity there to leverage those engagement opportunities to get the word out that way. Certainly, green infrastructure comes up in that context. I don't know, Rachel, if you have anything to add.
No, I think that covers it.
All right, thank you very much, Lisa, Rachel. We appreciate you being here and the time you spent. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to move ahead to legislative update, and we have our Legislative Affairs Director from the Water Environment Federation all the way.
I'm gonna stand over here and lurk over these guys, because apparently I can't be a disassociated voice. See?
So lurking over somebody's shoulder, you think that's better?
Michael can look over my shoulder.
Lurking over your shoulder.
So I think there's some slides, right?
Yeah, I don't know how we.
Randy, can you bring them up?
Well, as that happens, I will kind of just start things off by saying thanks to NMSA for inviting me and Bianca Pinto, our Stormwater Director, to join you here today. And thank you for everybody for coming, to those of you who came to Minneapolis to join us for the Stormwater Summit. That's great. Looks like we're still looking for the slides.
Yeah,
Okay. So the long and short of it is that I'm not going to repeat a lot of what Michael's already said. I'm going to kind of look towards the future here a little bit in FY23. What's going to be what our goals are there, what our hopes are there, what our priorities are there, and try to get your help maybe down the road here and trying to attain some of those things. So for FY23, so the way that this all kind of
Move your mouse. We're back to
the way this.
I have no idea why it's doing that.
Why it's doing that.
You have an automatic advance?
Just go forward one. There you go. Nope.
Let's do it in Deutsch.
No, translate something to German, please.
Yeah.
Okay. No. All right. So I'm getting out. It's not fast. Yeah. Take back. Maybe.
Sorry, I stole it because it was getting out of control, but I can give it back if you want.
No, you
Ones.
Yeah.
That's fine. All right. So as Michael said, a lot was included in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act that was guaranteed funding that was going to be run through the Clean Water SRF. That will be going out over the next 5 years. It did also provide for authorization for additional funding on top of the SRF funds that were guaranteed, as well as a number of new grant programs across the board for drinking water, wastewater, stormwater. We were particularly pleased by the amount of stuff in there that will either directly or indirectly benefit stormwater that was authorized in the package. The additional money that's available that could be available in FY23 through the SRF program, but also a whole bunch of newly authorized programs that we need to get initial funding for in the FY23 budget, such as the Stormwater Centers of Excellence, the Stormwater Planning and Implementation Grant Program, that additional money for the OSG program that we've spoken about already, resilience grants that specifically calls out money to help with stormwater, circuit riders that would benefit, that would bring stormwater planning assistance to smaller communities, alternative source water, which includes stormwater as a source, and then it reauthorized the WIFIA program. All those things, have all those things are now authorized. They just need to get the funding in place for them. So on the Stormwater Centers of Excellence, recently WEF and NMSA sent a letter to Capitol Hill, co-signed by Villanova, University of Maryland, Ohio State, who else? Minnesota.
Minnesota,
New
I
Hampshire.
think Ohio State.
Ohio State, yeah.
All the
New
people I know
Hampshire.
that are gonna be applying.
Yeah. A few others. So we sent a letter up to the House as they were completing their appropriations drafting process for the FY23 Interior and Environment Appropriations Bill. The Senate is going to go next, but that probably won't happen until sometime in the fall. But we'll do a similar letter over to the Senate asking for the full funding as well as additional funding for the centers of excellence if possible. But we're right now just kind of waiting, literally waiting for the committee report to be released from the House Interior and Environment or the House Appropriations Committee to Wednesday, excuse me. They're going to mark up the full bill, and we'll see the committee report then and see what gets funded in the FY23 bill that's coming through the House. We'll still have another bite at the apple when it gets over to the Senate. So, but we're hoping that we'll see some things in that House version of the bill, as well as get some more stuff in the Senate. And then my projection on FY23 is that it's going to go into a calendar year 23 before they get it all done. This is an election year. The House is very likely to flip to Republican control based upon numbers. The Senate may flip, so they're probably just going to do a continuing resolution out until the calendar year 23 before they get everything done. So I guess I'll move on to the next slide then.
Yeah, just really quick, Steve,
Yeah.
if both of those bodies of Congress do flip, what does that mean for appropriations on the bill?
So a couple things. I think they'll probably provide some additional money for the water infrastructure stuff that was included in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. Probably not the levels that were originally hoped for. The president was great with his budget proposal to Congress. He called for full funding for all of those things. All the stuff that was authorized in IIJA. But the House Budget Committee came back with a budget allocation to the Appropriations Committee that only called for about an 8% increase over previous FY22 domestic spending levels. So it'll be how they divvy that money up into all the separate appropriations bills still to be seen. But I'm guessing that they're going to. Probably the Republicans will probably scale those numbers back below what the Democrats probably would have done. That said, we won't see probably the earmarks that we saw in FY22 that we could possibly be seeing in FY23 if the Democrats by some miracle hold on to the House and hold on to the Senate. If they lose the House, earmarks will probably go away either way for FY23. Which does also mean that maybe more money goes to some new stuff, since there's going to be less set aside for special projects that are, desired by members of Congress.
Will we continue to see earmarks just being used in general, do you think, or increased in the future? And
It's become increasingly political. I mean, I'm guessing that Republicans aren't going to have earmarks in any appropriations bills going forward. I mean, they may, but they've kind of taken the position that they're opposed to earmarks generally.
Gotcha.
Yep. So on other things legislatively, the stormwater hearing where we've been talking to Senator Cardin's office about putting together, Seth and I have been speaking with Senator Cardin's office about putting together a hearing focusing on stormwater needs for the nation, kind of just a carryover from what we saw coming out of the IIJA, kind of helping Congress to stay informed about what the future challenges are and why it's important that we get more money for stormwater and more assistance for communities to helping with their stormwater challenges. It was initially focused mostly on the kind of Clean Water Act focus of it, but and it still will be, but it seems like it's also going to include some maybe some transportation angles or U.S. Army Corps of Engineer angles now too. But we're hoping that we see something come together on that in July, but I'm guessing that's going to slip until like September sometime. Yeah. Then also the Senate is also starting to work on stormwater or some water policy legislation, kind of what was left off the table or left out of IIJA. or fell off the table during negotiations of IAJ. And so we're going to maybe see some a package come together in the fall in the Senate, but it probably wouldn't move legislatively until 2023. PFAS legislation stuff was passed out of the House, but it's been stalled in negotiations in the Senate. There's very strong differences of opinions between the Democrats and Republicans on it. I don't know if the health advisory limitation that the EPA released recently that drops the limits for PFOA and PFOS to astronomically low numbers below detection technology and detection capability. I don't know if that's going to kickstart the negotiations process, but we have had a lot of conversations with the Senate folks on that, and just a desire if they're going to go a PFAS regulatory path of using the CERCLA, the Superfund law, we want a liability exemption carved out for drinking water, wastewater, stormwater, regional water agencies, so they don't so they're not subject to liability under the Superfund law, because they're not producers of PFAS, they're just receivers of it. And so we want to make sure that we get some sort of a exemption there. And then on the Farm Bill, they're going to do one in 2023. Something for us to probably as a community to be looking at, how can we try to get in anything in the Farm Bill that may benefit stormwater management or just water quality management at a regional level. There's maybe some opportunities there. So just keep it on our radar. Really quickly on regulatory stuff, EPA put out a proposed financial capability assessments guidance. I think we're probably hopefully going to see any day now, Michael. I don't know what the final decision is on it.
A lot of people have a lot to say.
Yes, I understand that. And I will be honest that WEF was not overly pleased with what the EPA had proposed to do with it. So, I mean, it would almost to the point where we're, I think, more comfortable with staying with the 97 guidance than proceeding with what the EPA put out for this these changes. So I think we'll see what comes out here and go forward from there. And then PFAS, I just mentioned the health advisory limits just came out of EPA, and I mentioned the CERCLA liability exemption for water agencies. If EPA has the authority and they proceed with CERCLA, they have the authority to provide that liability exemption, but we'll take it. If it needs a congressional action, we'll take that. We'll have to pursue with that too. And WOTUS, honestly, I'm not that looped in on all the things that's going on with WOTUS right now. I just know that EPA continues to work on WOTUS. So I don't know if Lisa or Heather or Rachel have any comments on WOTUS, but I'll just stop there because I know we're way over on time. So I think that's it. Oh, one more slide, sorry. Okay, as I've been mentioning all this stuff on the need for funding, WEF's Water Advocates Program is our grassroots program. It's open to everybody, WEF members, NMSA members, anybody, your grandmother can send a letter to your member of Congress asking for some of the policy priorities. Oh, thank you, Lisa or Elizabeth. If we have a call to action up right now for calling for FY23 funding. So if you haven't done it, please visit the Water Advocates page. You could use that QR code or the bit.ly link there to go to the Water Advocates page, and all you have to do is drop in your info, your home address info, and it pulls your members of Congress, and you could hit send on a form letter, or you could edit the form letter if you so choose, emphasizing more on stormwater, but just wanting to get as much messaging to Congress as possible about the need for support for water infrastructure funding. So, okay.
Is there a special bring your grandmother into the advocates program? Is that why you're putting it in?
Did you have a question, Randy?
I had a quick comment, which was that NMSA is hugely privileged to be able to work with Steve on working with Congress. And we've got conversations underway with congressional offices and committee staff. And it's to the point now where they are approaching us to look for ideas and to look for feedback on draft materials. It's essentially the beginning of real communication between the stormwater sector and Congress, and it's just really cool.
I'll take it a step further. I mean, it's been a joy to work with staff and NMSA generally on all this. I showed earlier on the slide there, our policy recommendation document. That's been a joint document that WEF and NMSA have developed. We've talked about the needs survey. We've talked about the EFAB stormwater report. We've talked about more money through the Clean Water SRF for stormwater. All those things originated out of that stormwater policy recommendations document we took to Congress, and Congress acted upon them, and now EPA is following through with them. So it really matters. So your help on all this stuff is really important. So thank you.
Joyful. I like that. That's the word of the day.
That's the word of the day.
Well, thanks a lot, Steve, and we appreciate you taking the seat. And, in recognition of the time, we had quite a lengthy NMSA update, and not that it's not important, but we're going to get that to you in the notes and probably through the NMSA newsletter and some other ways. We'll communicate that. But I just wanted to close. We have 4 minutes left with the NMSA strategic vision, and these are some of the things that we're working on now and going forward. The first one is enhanced communication with MS4 permittees. You're going to be seeing quite a few different ways that we're going to be doing that through webinars. We're also looking at actually being more visible at national conferences.
The listserv?
Listserv, yes, we're also working on a listserv. So look for new and enhanced ways over the next year that you'll be seeing that we'll be providing communication, because I mean, there's just, you can't have too much information. Well, I suppose you could, but you can at least discount it and not pay attention to it. Another thing that we're doing is we're continuing to, and this is something that Randy's been working very hard on. He's kind of our chief funding officer, CFO, for federal funding. You've heard a lot about the Clean Water State Revolving Fund. We've been working on this idea of carving out a separate stormwater state revolving fund, and that's something that we're going to be working on with Steve in the future, potentially, to again recognize the fact that stormwater doesn't have a constant source of revenue to pay back loans. I think that's really the chief stumbling block that we're seeing. So trying to work with some other workaround for that. And so anyway, that's front and center on our plate. There's been a lot of talk. We're in the Stormwater Institute talking about this. Rob's been working on this, one of the pioneers pushing it forward. This whole thing about climate change and precipitation frequency estimation and who's going to take the lead on that. NMSA really believes that that's a federal issue best in terms of the lead. There's no federal agency that's set up to be that leader right now, but that's something that we're going to be working on and talking about, because frankly, the MS4s are at the end of the pipe on this issue, and there's really no guidance. There's really no, how do you downscale a regional climate model to a town in Tennessee? I mean, it's not happening quick enough. And so we're going to be working on that issue and partnering with WEF on that. And you've just heard about what we've been talking about with Congress and with Steve Dye working to push some of this forward, because a lot of it is not at a policy level. It has to be done at the legislative level. So that's one of the areas that NMSA is going to continue to work on, and just overall growth and improvement. So it is 4:59. We're ending at 5, so that gives Seth or Randy 1 minute to chime in here.
Fill up that minute. No, I don't. Thanks for everybody for making time to to hear what's going on, and this national level visioning and looking at stuff in Congress and what's going on at EPA. These things really matter, and we're trying to drive more of this national type of conversation. So I appreciate everybody being here, and Randy for hosting.
Thank you,
host. Any closing remarks since you're the host?
Just remember where the bathrooms are.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it. Thank you, everybody on the web. See you soon.
Well, thank you. That was very nice.